flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great, thank you. So first up today, we actually have a closed session, and that will be conference with agency designated labor negotiator regarding employee organization, according to Government Code 54957.6. The estimated time for this is about 20 to 30 minutes. And when we return from closed session, we will report out and then we will take public comment. So.
Sorry about that.
Recording stopped.
Yuba-Sutter.Live's local government live streams are presented by Plumas Lake Self-Storage in Plumas Lake, where lifelong local residents are helping other residents keep things safe, providing indoor storage units, outdoor RV and vehicle parking, moving supplies, and Penske truck rentals. Details at plumaslakeselfstorage.com. There's an American flair at our county fair, the Yuba-Sutter Fair, Thursday, June 23rd through Sunday, June 26th. See locally raised livestock and the care given them by their young owners. Then buy some of the best sheep, pigs, goats, and beef beginning at 9 a.m. Saturday, June 25th. It's all at the Yuba-Sutter Fair with an American flair at our county fair, noon Thursday, June 23rd through 10 p.m. Sunday, June 26th. Get details at ysfair.com.
a song from The Sound of Music. How do you solve a problem like North Yuba? How do you solve a problem so entrenched? I'm not on tune. I'm here to tell you that I think you do know, although I do not see evidence of this as of today. And I'm here to tell you that I told everyone I know that you do know what to do, that you do have power that we don't have, that you do see us, that you do get it, the time is passing and we get closer to fire season every single day. That you do know that we could lose our farms tomorrow and our houses next week. That you get it, that we are trying to build a food scene, a farm to fork, a local restaurant, just food gardens for families to make it through these times. You do know how happy I was when you arranged for an ad hoc committee to solve the situation in North Yuba. That was 2 months ago, 8 weeks. Now the question becomes, do you actually know how to make this part of your county work again? Do you have a plan? Do you have deadlines? Are you actually serious? I don't, in fact, know this all the time. I have to explain to my future constituents, because I'm going to run. I did say that the Yuba-Sutter Agency was going to help us and that they know how, but I'm not so sure anymore. When the ad hoc committee was formed, Brent Hasty told you all that, and I quote, "This community had so much happen behind our backs, behind closed doors. We should try to make this commitment to do everything in public session. That way they can trust us. Let's work with transparency. You chose to get more done quicker behind closed doors, and here we are. I don't see anything. It's becoming very hard to keep trust in you. I believe that things are happening. I believe that you have a plan, but I can't see it. And I can't really tell my community members anymore than that I think you do, that I kind of trust you do. We went to court last year with an emergency injunction brought by me. The judge said basically that he had to listen to the agency over the common folks. And this would be so different if you brought anything. You are the Yuba-Water Agency. You're respected, you actually know. By now, you should be able to see that North Yuba does not play nice. We told you so. That North Yuba is not honest with numbers, does not show up to meetings, does not respond to offers. We did tell you so. And South Feather tried too. Anyway, I'm left with the hope that you now also know this to be the sad and lonely truth. They are a rogue special district. Something needs to happen. We are out of time. They do not respond to nice letters. For the sake of Yuba County water rights, Yuba County businesses, Yuba County constituents, and the image of Yuba County in the press, please step it up. Do something that we can see.
Thank you. Next up is Charles Sharp.
Hello? Okay. Good morning. Hello, Charles Sharp, Oregon House. I hope everyone is doing well today, especially Director Furr. On your slate today is a $14 million loan to Yuba County. Nowhere in the Yuba County Water Agency Act does it say anything about loaning money. Forget the pretense. Why don't you just open up your own bank? The bank is the Yuba County Water Agency and be done with it. You already have an excellent accountant on staff. Since 2017, by my count, you have made grants to the North Yuba Water District totaling $844,725. Has the North Yuba Water District provided any accountability for this money? You made these grants despite a number of red flags being raised, including a Public Records Act request lawsuit by a sitting director that the district lost. These red flags were ignored because that is what Director Fletcher wanted, meddling, if you will. Arguably, without such meddling, the voters might have corrected some of the district's governance problems. I've been told a number of times that the Yuba Water Agency has no influence on how the water district directors vote, but your grant money speaks volumes of influence. While the county is talking about all the new development, the people's wells are going dry and businesses are failing in the foothills. The one director could so dominate and skew the grant process suggests the Yuba Water Agency needs to examine how it goes about making grants and establishing some safeguards. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone else in the room before we move to the Zoom? Okay, seeing no one, I see Dr. Floor.
Thank you very much. This may go just slightly long. I would beg the board's indulgence to allow me to finish. Thank you.
I would ask you to please keep it to 3 minutes.
I will do my best.
Thank
Over
you.
the last 4 years, I've come before the Yuba Water Agency, bringing with me data and documents to draw attention to the sins of North Yuba Water District and their board. I've been greatly encouraged in the last years. Yuba Water Agency has opened their collective hearts and minds to the plight of the North Yuba community of small farmers and ranchers. Their plight is real. Ranchers and farmers are losing their livelihoods, selling up and moving away. Local families are losing their wells, and the entire community is now at very extreme fire risk due to the agency's refusal to provide irrigation water. Irrigation water does so much more than support livestock and farms. It provides water for fire protection, recharges the groundwater, and creates green belts around homes and canals. Post-fire evaluations show that green belts frequently stop the progression of fire. North Yuba is implementing a cruel, vicious policy of refusing to deliver irrigation water, even though water is plentiful in the reservoirs, and South Feather has offered to help in multiple ways. We have been here in front of this board time and time again, providing data and evidence that the sins of North Yuba go far beyond the refusal to deliver water. North Yuba Board President Gary Hawthorne and his band of appointed directors refuse to meet with or talk to the public and have created meetings that are only opportunities for them to approve giving the general manager another raise and to spend more money on legal fees. What more does Yuba Water Agency need to finally accept that there is something seriously wrong with the North Yuba Water District General Manager and the board? How much more does the community have to lose before Yuba Water Agency does something? We were thrilled when the ad hoc committee was established. Since then, we've seen no action taken and observed no meetings. We were to be invited to those meetings. We were very gratified to see the Yuba Water Agency demand that Maupin come before them to provide accountability of all the money North Yuba has taken and wasted. Since then, the recipient of the largesse of the Yuba Water Agency has refused to come before them and be accountable. We were greatly encouraged when the Yuba Water Agency followed through and met with South Feather to work on a solution to getting us water. We were not surprised that the GM and Gary Hawthorne refused to show up. The question really is, why did anyone expect a different outcome? So we've heard a lot of talk, and there it has stayed. We're out of time. We do not come here because we have nothing else to do. We all do. We have jobs, families, lives to live, all put on hold because there's no water. And this is the fight for the very lives of this community and the lives of the community itself. North Yuba does not merely ignore irrigation customers in infrastructure. North Yuba also ignores domestic customers in infrastructure. And now there are issues with the domestic water. For the last 4 years, I and others have raised alarms about the domestic infrastructure, all of which have gone largely ignored. 70-year-old infrastructure rotting underground while the district gives the GM another raise to $196,000 a year. Over 50% of domestic water is lost to leaks underground. The replacement of the storage tanks hasn't happened. Today, the challenge tank is losing 1 million gallons a year.
You could please wrap it up, Dr. Ford.
I estimate that we have 2 weeks before our next media interview. I would love to be able to tell the interviewer how instrumental the Yuba Water Agency was in solving the life-threatening problems wrought by North Yuba. I would love to laud the leadership of the Yuba Water Agency writing the chronic cruel actions of a rogue board. I would love to tell a story of the rogue actions.
I need you to please wrap it up.
This is the narrative I hope to convey. Time will tell. Thank you.
Thank you. You see any additional public comment? Okay. Thank you. Next, we will move on to consent items. Any questions or comments from the board?
Move to approve. Second.
Okay. Have a first and a second. Any public comment on consent items? Okay. Seeing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Thank you. Next, we will move on to discussion items, starting with item 4, consider adoption of resolution 2022-09, approving a draft wildlife conservation board reducing drought impacts in California block grant, Yuba reintroduction working group, pre-pilot project studies and planning grant agreement regarding a $2 million grant from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and authorize the general manager to execute corresponding documents. Willie?
Yeah, so this is a unique opportunity for the agency. Yes, it is a grant, but it's not a normal grant process where we applied for a grant to get something done. We were actually approached by CDFW as part of the Yuba Reintroduction Working Group, where CDFW said, hey, we have some funding. We would like to invest in studies in the North Yuba River related to salmon reintroduction. Would Yuba Water Agency like to be the grantee to help get this work done? And of course, I accepted. We've been a participant in the working group for several years now. And so this is a $2 million grant from CDFW through the Wildlife Conservation Board to get a specific task related to that working group done. We've kind of negotiated the scope of work to be included in the grant over the past several weeks. And it's $2 million to the water agency to work through this group to get some studies done in the North Yuba River.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the board?
One question. What is a rotary screw trap?
A rotary screw trap is a mechanical device that's placed in the river to capture fish. It's primarily used for sampling fish to do various scientific studies.
So it's just arbitrarily placed in the river?
It's placed at a location that's obviously a natural location, but strategically located based on the velocity and the slope of the river channel so that it can function properly and spin at the right revolutions per minute and have the right flow rate through it. And part of the study is, do those locations exist? Where do those locations exist? Are they effective? Are they effective based on the range of flows that the North Yuba River experiences? So all of those are, and more, are questions that we'll answer as part of the study.
Okay, thanks.
So moved. Second.
Okay, I have a first and a second. Any public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank you. Next, we'll move on to item 5. Consider a grant for up to $350,000 to the South Yuba River Citizens League in support of the Lower Long Bar Restoration Project. Willie?
Yeah, so this is a project the South Yuba River Citizens League has been working on for several years. It's upstream of Sycamore Ranch on the Lower Yuba River. It's on property owned or operated by SRI gravel mining operation. And it's basically, it's like a mini Hallwood project. It's, they do the mining, and part of the restoration will be creating side channels and habitat for salmon. Circle's been working on it for several years. They've acquired most of the funding from outside sources, federal funds. I found out that they have a funding shortfall a few weeks ago, and they were trying to solve that funding shortfall through our river management team. The budget of the river management team was slightly short. There's several line items, there's several opportunities for budgets there. But I thought, and they had a start date of tomorrow where they wanted to get all the funding they needed to actually start work in the field tomorrow. And I said, how about we just take this to my board on the 21st? It's a great project for habitat. It's within our mission. It's within our interests. Let us fund it. Let's get this work going. At the same time, I'm working with Department of Water Resources on several other habitat projects. Department of Water Resources and the state have significant funds to spend on habitat, primarily right now related to the drought. I asked Department of Water Resources staff in particular, hey, would you like to participate in 50% of this funding shortfall? So $350,000 from the Yuba Water Agency may be reimbursed by the state, or 50% may be reimbursed by the state. They just didn't have the time to get all their paperwork in order. And I told the state, I'll take it to my board. I'll let my board know what we're doing, that there's a chance that 50% of this will be reimbursed by you. It's not a guarantee. And so that's where we landed, and that's potentially the plan.
So through the chair, how this financially works, you don't write them a check for $350, but you kind of process it as it goes along. Is that how it comes together?
We have not worked out the grant agreement with Circle yet. I don't know if they need the funds next week for in the initial phase, or if they won't need it for 6 or 8 months. But what we're asking you is to authorize $350, and the check would be written from us to Circle at some point. It might be next week. It might be 6 months from now, or a year from now. We may get reimbursed for 50% of whatever that check is from the state.
I'll make the motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, I have a first and a second. Any additional board comment or questions?
Gary, sorry.
Yeah.
Dr. Bradford. I just wanted to mention, I meant to mention, Melinda from Circle is online if there's any questions from Melinda. I just wanted to note that she is here to support this request. And by the way, this is not a request that she brought to us. I reached out to her and said, how about this? So I just want to be clear on that.
Great, thank you. Morning, Melinda, and welcome. Is there anything you'd like to say?
Good morning. Just very quickly, want to just thank you for considering this. The project is just under 50 acres. As Willie said, it's a smaller version of the Hallwood project, mostly focused on rearing. And we've raised about 90% of all the funds needed. And because of a couple unanticipated delays around permitting that are now resolved, we started a little bit later, which increased the cost of the project. So you considering coming in at the end and closing that funding gap is really wonderful, and we're grateful for the potential support. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any public comment on this item? Charles? I think so. Can he use either? Oh, okay.
Thank you, Charles Sharp. While the South Yuba River Citizens League is a nonprofit in Nevada County, this project money would be spent in Yuba County. So I think that's a good idea. I approve. Thank you.
Why, thank you, Charles. What a gentleman.
Seeing no additional public comment, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. We'll now move on to item 6. Consider authorizing an amendment to the $3.5 million grant to Yuba County Public Works for internal drainage CIP projects to modify the scope of the grant. Morning, Sam Bunton.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairman and members of the board. I'm Sam Bunton, Assistant Director of Public Works for Yuba County. Today's item is the consideration of an amendment to the grant that previously gave $2.5 million to our North Bill Road Complete Streets Phase 2 project. So a little background on what got us here today. The Public Works Department was previously awarded funding from Sacramento Area Council of Governments, or SACOG, in the 2021 Flexible Funding Round to complete 3 different projects. 2 of these were road projects on Hamilton-Smartsville, and then the third one is a planning electric vehicle EV planning grant. And so all 3 of these projects have been funded by SACOG using federal funds, which increase costs, environmental studies and permits, and timeline to completion. SACOG offered to Public Works to transfer these federal funds to an existing Public Works project, which in this case is the North Bill Road Complete Streets Phase 2 project, and in turn shifting the local funds currently allocated for North Bill, which we've been calling quote unquote defederalizing the fund and other 3 projects from the 2021 Flexible Funding Round. So North Bill Road is currently budgeted to use approximately about $4.6 million in federal funds from SACOG, and then local funds, including 2.5 from the Water Agency and other miscellaneous road and impact fees. So today, Yuba County Public Works requests that the Water Agency Board of Directors amend the grant agreement that provided $2.5 million for North Bill Road Complete Streets Phase 2 and allocate those funds to the county's 3 projects originally funded from SACOG. And so using local funds instead of federal funds for these 2021 Flexible Funding Round projects is anticipated to save approximately $700,000 and complete the projects 1 year ahead of schedule. And the county believes that this will have no impact to North Bill Road since it's already partially federally funded. Any questions from the board?
Any questions?
That's my thank you for initiating this. And I'll make the motion to authorize amendment.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
On the charging stations, have they decided on the type of charging stations they're going to, because Tesla is proprietary, I believe.
I can come back with additional details, but
just curious.
So as of right now, it would be a large scale, just kind of planning grant, figuring out the actual locations. The intent right now is to figure out the locations, and then with potentially future grants or projects, really finalizing like the plans and specs and those types of things regarding the specific charging stations and those types of things used.
So it's planning only.
Yeah. The $100,000 for that project is planning only.
Okay, do I have a second?
A second, and a quick question, Sam. Do you know of any other projects headed our way from Public Works over the next 6 months that you could share with us?
Yeah, so with the,
In general, and maybe not a lot of specifics, but in general.
if this gets approved, one of the projects on the list is the Doolittle Gate intersection project. We're currently working with Beal with anticipations or the hope that we can, with their timing, do our intersection project at the same time as their Doolittle Drive project. So that's one of them. We're currently in design for a lot of projects, but the big projects that'll be coming down the way is that Doolittle Drive. We're anticipating completing this year. McGowan Road is another big project. That's where we're doing a shared turn all the way through from 65 to 70. As well as it's also an active transportation project that'll do sidewalks and bike lanes and those types of things. So those are the two big projects that are coming this fall.
Great, thank you.
Okay, any public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, I have a first and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, next up is item 7, consider approval of a request from the member units to forego the automatic 2.5% annual increase for both the base and metered usage components of member unit water supply agreements for the 2022 irrigation season. Morning, Ryan.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Ryan McNally, your Director of Water Resources and Flood Risk Reduction. So yeah, up for consideration this morning is an annual request from our member units to forego the contractual 2.5% annual increase for the water supply allocation. And so this provision was something that was baked into the current water supply agreement. And so you may remember last year that we had the same request the year before. So this is something that happens every year. So as long as the agency is doing well financially, it's something that we've considered in the past. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments from board members?
What is the dollar amount?
I'm afraid you're going to ask. I'm embarrassed to know. It's the increase would be less than $100,000 per year. So it's I don't know, Curtis.
There's specific language in the original act that said we could use power revenues or offsetting water costs. I believe that's the clauses that we're doing this under.
That's correct, and that was the origin of that point when this agreement was negotiated in 2016. That's the element of that.
Through the chair, just a comment that you might want to pass along here, a little history that goes back to this original agreement. Myself and Roger Abbey had met with the water districts to talk about how is this all going to work, and they wanted to make sure this clause was built into it for obvious reason, and it really makes sense. And from the agency's point of view, it's not a huge budgetary issue that we should be concerned with. However, from day one, this is a compounding effect. To the very first request, had that gone through and that $100,000 had come in, then that's building a base. And each year that 100,000 grows a little bit. Over a 10-year period, it turns into millions of dollars, which is another source of revenue for the community without a lot of high dollar to the member units. I am very much in favor of the board having the ability to adjust as needed, like we've been doing. I guess my caution to the member units would be somewhere in the future, I suspect this needs to be amended just a bit. So I would at least petition them to understand the next board may want to actually make a water increase. As you look around the state of California, there are counties that would give you 2.5%. Are you kidding me? They'll give you whatever you want just to get the water, let alone the 2.5%, which is really marginal. And we are very fortunate and blessed with the water we have. So not to damper this, it's a good deal. I like it. I think the board is probably in favor of it, but please remember that it's reasonable to ask for small change over a long period rather than, by the way, we have to increase by 50% some year. Hopefully we never get to anything outrageous in a dollar amount. Just a general discussion. You might want to encourage that the member units understand that that's, there could be a future board that says, wait a minute, we do need to actually make some reasonable attempt to bring the price to a reasonable number for obvious reasons. So I'll make that motion.
Okay, have a first. Is there a second? I was going to say, any additional board comment or question?
Yeah, so I guess if there was any year in which to do a 2.5% increase, it would be this year because, as you said, water is at quite a premium. Sales of water has generated quite a bit of funds, and this would be the year to do it. If we aren't going to do an increase, what would it look like if that 2.5% was instead directed to some other source? Would it? My thought was the Yuba River Endowment is a charity that's controlled and owned by the member units. They could put the money in that direction instead of having an increase from us, which would have a compounding effect over the years that could be sizable. Is that something that can be done, or how would that be arranged? Or,
you know, I can't speak on behalf of the endowment, so I can't answer that question. I'd have to let someone from the endowment speak to that, and I'd also have to defer to legal counsel to see if it's something that we can do, you know, contractually.
So our 2.5% bump, could it be deferred to the endowment instead of to us?
Yes, it would, but I believe it would require a renegotiation of the member unit water service agreements.
All right. So then I have to wait until this motion gets finished, and then I would make that motion to renegotiate?
You'd have to get it on the agenda with a whole new program request. So that isn't something that could be done today, if I'm
That is correct.
Okay, any additional board comment or question? Any public comment? Charles Sharp.
Yes, I think you should give the member units a break. You got lots of money, and help them out this way, and, you know, go for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no additional public comment and having a first and a second, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
Okay.
Thank you. Just in closing, so we did confirm the magnitude of this increase is $21,000.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is item 8. Consider recommending approval of amendment number 3 to the agreement with Yuba County for a 12-month cash flow loan in the amount of $14,403,339 to prepay the county's annual unfunded liability portion of CalPERS payment for fiscal year 22-23. Morning, Curtis.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm here to introduce and field any questions for a cash flow loan to Yuba County. As mentioned, this is a cash flow loan that we've been doing annually since 2017. What we're doing here is taking advantage of an opportunity for cost savings for Yuba County. The way we achieve cost savings, just for a little bit of background, there is a payment due to CalPERS every member in July to pay down some of the unfunded liability that's being created with CalPERS underachieving the investment target that they've set. So everyone is actually incurring a unfunded liability. There's two options to pay down that unfunded liability, either a lump sum in July, or you effectively finance over 12 monthly installments with CalPERS at an interest rate of 7%. So what we're doing here is using the county pool rate to create a cost saving opportunity so the county can borrow at effectively the county pool rate, not the 7%, and realize a cost savings. This year, it's estimated to be about $315,000.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Okay.
Save the money.
I have a first and a second. Council?
Yeah, I just want to respond to a comment made in public comment about the Yuba County Water Agency Act not containing authority for this type of loan. And that statement was correct. The authority for this is not found in the Agency Act, it's found in the government code. And I just wanted to address that comment because it related to this particular agenda item and confirm that you do have legal authority under the government code for this loan.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? Okay, I do have a question. I know it can vary from month to month or day to day. I don't know how often it changes, but the current pool interest rate, do you know what that is?
Well, what was great about the county request is it included a projected interest rate that the county pool would expect to achieve. It starts out the first, I think, 6 months at 1%. and up to 1.5%. I think it's relatively conservative, but it was nice of them to project that because right now we're currently at 0.5%. But as you know, the Fed funds rate increasing will raise every subsequent rate. So that's the savings that we would look to achieve is the difference between that 7% and the 1 and 1.5%. As far as impact to the water agency, since we would be invested in the pool at the 1 or 1.5%, there is no financial impact to the agency whatsoever.
Great, thank you. And I just want to reiterate that I know sometimes when this comes up, usually on an annual basis, I see a lot of public comments related to the county not being able to fund CalPERS and the water agency bailing out the county. And, just wanted to point out that this is in fact a savings to taxpayers, a significant savings to taxpayers, not a cost, at no detriment to the water agency. We are still paid the full interest that we would be receiving if the money was sitting in the county pool. And yet the county is able to save, estimated $315,000 in interest charges by doing this, by simply paying the money up front in July rather than paying it on a monthly basis. So I think it's an amazing opportunity for county taxpayers at no detriment to the agency. And so I think it's great that we're able to do this. So any public comment on the item? Charles Sharp.
Yes, thank you. I think the issue is what you pointed out is how did Yuba County get in the situation where it has $14 million or whatever it is, unfunded liability. To me, an unfunded liability is a bill you can't pay. And if I have unfunded liabilities, I'm in trouble because I don't have a Yuba Water agency. But I'm just saying, how did the county get into that? And that's not your question today because you're wearing your water agency hats, but that's your question next week when you wear your Yuba County supervisor hats. And it's just a question. How did the county get into that situation? How could you better get out of it? Thank you.
There's an easy answer to that question, Charles, and I'd be happy to speak with you offline about it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have a first and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Next up is item 9. Consider a MOU regarding Feather River Regional Plan for Flood Protection and authorize the Director of Water Resources and Flood Risk Reduction to execute. Morning again, Ryan.
Good morning again. So yeah, before you this morning is another consideration for a memorandum of understanding with the regional Feather River Regional Plan for Flood Protection. The RFMP is what we call it. And you may recall in November of late 2021, we came before you to add ourselves as a signature to the plan and to amend the plan. And I talked about a little bit, there was a plan to, as we were restructuring Trillia and our relationship with the Three Rivers Levee Improvement Authority, that we were looking at RD 784 as becoming a party to that agreement. And so that's what this is. This is to enter into this MOU is just housekeeping. What it would do is take Three Rivers Levee Improvement Authority out of the MOU and replace them with the RD 784. The reason for that is we represent the same interests in South Yuba County, so there is a bit of redundancy. And a little bit of history there is, as this process has evolved, RD 784 has been noticeably absent. So I think it's a good fit, and that's why we recommend it.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? Okay, any public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved. Second.
Okay, have a first and a second. All in favor say aye. 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 Any opposed? Great. Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is item 10. Consider issuing a line of credit of up to $3 million and a grant for up to $2 million to the Three Rivers Levee Improvement Authority to provide financial assistance through the project closeout process under the DWR Proposition 1E program. Morning, Kevin.
Yes, good morning, Chair, Directors. Kevin Mallon, Yuba County Administrator, as well as the Three Rivers Levee Improvement Authority Executive Director. So by way of background on this, and there was actually a Three Rivers Levee Improvement Authority meeting last week that provided a robust background on Three Rivers achievement, achieving the 200-year. But just by way of background, this is we're coming up on 19 years, or actually we just passed 19 years from when Department of Water Resources, the Army Corps, informed the county, the water agency, RD 784, that levee improvements were needed really to achieve at the time 100-year flood protection for our urban areas. And that venture started out thinking it was a $30 million venture, right? And it'd take a couple of years, and it evolved, and it's a $500 million venture over the past 19 years. And I do want to applaud the agency being that support to the county and RD 784 as we've kind of run the gauntlet and successfully achieved not only the 100-year, but now the 200-year level of protection, and really successfully brought in hundreds of millions of dollars of funds, non-local funds to achieve that. But as part of that, there's kind of as you wrap things up and you close things out, these state funds that we've relied on, Prop 1E, for example, they're a reimbursement basis. So you have to cash flow these projects locally and then seek state reimbursement. And as we wind down to the end, we're running into kind of a cash flow pinch point. And then also kind of our financial consultants as well as agency staff have been really kind of checking over Three Rivers books to see what's going to be realized in terms of revenue as we close out these Trilla projects. And what's before you today is our recommendation on how to kind of cash flow the closeout of the projects, and what we see is a realistic funding needed to close them out in terms of what Trilla needs to borrow from the agency to cash flow, and what Trilla needs in terms of a grant. So what's before you today is Trilla requesting a $3 million cash flow loan and a $2 million grant. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Okay.
Through the chair. A quick question is kind of an overview. So Trilla, does it go away? Does it continue? A little bit of projection here.
Right. So for the looking forward to Trilla, there aren't any planned projects for Trilla, new projects beyond what we're trying to close out. That's not to say there won't be things that come up in the future. Really, Trilla is a mechanism an implementation mechanism, for us to be able to capture grant funds and implement a project. And so if opportunities come up, we'll obviously be presenting those opportunities to the Trilla board and potentially the agency. But really that's kind of, but as far as Trilla going away, Trilla has an indebtedness associated with it. There's part of the funding, you have this bond indebtedness, and that repayment schedule, I believe, goes on for about another 30 years. So at least for the next 30 years, Trilla as an entity is going to need to exist. And my guess is over the next 30 years, there'll probably be things that'll pop up, in terms of flood protection, where it'll be like, well, should we do this little project, and is Trilla the right entity to do that project?
So financially, you're closing down the major portion of the book, but it'll still kind of linger on as needed, if needed, in the next 30 years.
Yes, and it'll be essentially a zero staff organization. When Trilla was formed, the designated executive director was essentially was the county administrator, and then actually the other kind of officers in the entity were all county as well. And the reason for that is it was trying to be a low overhead type of organization. And then obviously we brought in Paul Bruner as executive director because when it was a $30 million endeavor, we thought, well, we can handle this with just county staff. Obviously, when it was a $500 million endeavor, we needed to bring in additional help. And then, of course, we have a robust consultant staff. But again, that's essentially an on-off switch. If the project's not there, there's no need to have the staff, the consulting staff.
Through the chair, didn't you just awarded a 200-year certification?
Yes, so that was what Trilla.
Not bad investment then.
Right. So Trilla achieved its goal of the 200-year level of flood protection for our urban area of the county.
I'll make the motion to approve.
Okay, I have a first and a second. Any public comment on this item, council?
Just one comment on the way the agenda is structured. It refers to issue a line of credit and grant. I just want to confirm the motion should reflect there will be a grant and loan agreement contract that's being worked on. So the motion could just reflect the approval of a loan and grant agreement.
So the motion that I would make is to approve the $3 million for a loan and a grant of $2 million to Three Rivers Levy. Per the agreement with Yuba County.
Modify second. So.
Okay, great. First and second. Don't see any additional public comment. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
All right, thank you.
Great, thank you. Next up, item 11, consider approval of the following, which was recommended by the ABP committee on June 7th, 2022. The proposed budget for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023, and projected budget for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024 for general and power system funds, the updated personnel allocation chart and new position justifications, and consider approval of the salary schedule for fiscal year 2023, which reflects a 5% increase to administrative and management employees that's effective on June 26, 2022. Good morning again, Curtis.
Good morning. After that agenda item, is there anything left to say? All right, so yes, proposed budget for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023. To tee it up, I'm maintaining a structure that we've been using over the last couple of years where I'll quickly go over the most recent set of monthly financial data that we have, kind of tee up the current financial health of the organization to kind of lend itself to the next fiscal year's budget. I am using April 2022. I did mention to the ABP committee that we would attempt to use May 2022. As we sat down to put together the May financials, there was not enough pieces yet to close the books on May in time to get the agenda packet out. So for the ABP members, they're seeing April again, as that's still the most recent monthly financials that we have. We're diving right in. We'll start with the agency-wide summary sheet. And for those of you that might be looking at this for the first time, I'll give you a lay of the land. The design of this sheet is to be kind of a one-pager. What is the current health of the agency and how has it trended over the last couple of fiscal years? So from left to right, you'll see final budgets versus actuals from fiscal year ending 2020 all the way through our most recent financial close, April 2022. I think I said 2020 over here. This is 2020, 2021, 2022. At the top, we have revenue, split power systems and general fund. In the center section here are expenses, power systems, and general fund. So we have an agency combined expense and the net effect on reserves. So we'll focus our attention today on the far right. How are we looking in the current fiscal year ending April 30th, 2022? Well, in power systems, we have a revenue of $56 million versus a budget of $79.5 million. Using projected year-end actuals, which is a slide later, but I want to give you a sense of it while we're looking at this sheet. We expect to come in about 89% of budget in power system revenue. General fund revenue, we're at $53.9 million against a budget of $71.3 million, projected to come in about 76% of budget. So for revenue overall, we're headed towards 83% of budget. And power systems, we're at $31.4 million against a budget of 48.7. So that's roughly 74% is what we're on track by the end of the year. And in general fund, we're at $38.7 million against a budget of $63.9 million. So we're headed towards roughly 70% of budget at year end. Overall agency expenses, we're trending to be about 72% of budget at year end. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those percentages, although they're not on the screen. I'll speak to them. Being this far in the year, we can start to see budgeting methodologies show themselves, particularly in general fund, where revenue is on track to be 76% of budget. Expenses are on track to be 70% of budget. We really like to aim for 10 to 15% of contingency on the power system side, just to account for project fluctuations. On the general fund side, to come in that far under budget, there's really one component that's causing that, and it's the aggressive way that we budget grants, both incoming and outgoing. What I mean by aggressive is on the revenue side, we are budgeting that the grant funding comes in quicker than we really think it will. On the expense side, those corresponding expenses for the grant, the underlying grant work, we're budgeting that we spend those quicker. On the outgoing grants, same kind of thing. We're projecting that the grants that are approved in the Community Impact Grant Program are dispersed quick. So it's aggressive. We're kind of front loading the expectation here. The reason we do that, both incoming and outgoing grants, we're subjecting ourselves to external schedules. How fast can the state get a grant approved, and can we land on a grant agreement and get it signed? And the community impact grant program, how fast can the underlying work that the pod recommends and the board fully approves, how fast can we get that work done? And how quickly will we see those requests for disbursement? So given those external schedules, the budgets are front loaded, and that's creating the additional contingency of 76% in revenue and 70% in expenses for general fund. All told through April 30th, 2022, we have a net effect on reserves of $39.9 million against a final budget of $38.2 million. I expect that number to be relatively flat to the end of the year. Going into a little more detail here, we'll start with power system revenue. Looking at April, we'll quickly lay the land on with this chart, just in case you're looking at it for the first time. This is monthly power systems revenue, and we're comparing the last 3 fiscal years to the current fiscal year. Here in April, I have the data called out as 5.5 million, a little less than last April, but what we're seeing is a pretty significant reduction in generation given the rainfall this year. We produced 31,000 megawatt hours in the current April against 65,000 megawatt hours last April. It only resulted in a small decrease in power system revenue because we've packed the generation we did have into the high price hours, as we've really kind of gained sophistication on bidding into the market. A couple of other outliers here that we'll look at. In January, I have that called out at 2.6 million. There's a significant reduction compared to the prior fiscal years. That was just the rainfall that we saw in December was helping meet our in-stream flow requirements so that we were able to conserve that water. At that point in time, we're in full conservation mode. If we didn't have to run the water through the units in a relatively low price month, being January, because it's not the peak summer months, we went ahead and conserved that. So there was a significant reduction in generation. We saw an uptick in really the second half of February and March. So we saw revenue of 4 million and then up to 6.6 million. As you guys remember, in December, it quit raining until about mid-April. So the generators were having to make up the in-stream flow requirements. Less ideal, obviously, because February and March pricing isn't as good as July and August, but those are the outliers there. Moving on to general fund revenue. This bar chart, very skewed. The same format as power system revenue. We're looking at general fund revenue this time, monthly compared I was able to go further back because there's less data on this chart, all the way back to 16, 17. The story here is the 28.2 million in July of this year, the 23.3 million in January of this year. That's the first and second half of the DWR Accord transfer payments being reflected in those 2 months. It has skewed the y-axis range on this chart. I'll have to come up with a plan unless we can find a way to continue making that kind of money in our water transfers. But assuming we cannot do that, we'll have to work on how this chart presents itself. But that really is the story in general fund, is we had a significant opportunity to make a substantial water transfer in the current year, and it's unlike anything we've seen previously. Moving on to agency-wide expenses. Same concept as the revenue charts. We're looking at monthly expenses. This is both power systems and general fund compared to the last 3 fiscal years. I will talk about some of the outliers here again. So October obviously sticks out like a sore thumb, much higher than previous Octobers. That is due to the Our House sediment removal project. That was budgeted about $7 million project. That's not something that we do each and every year, so that really was the outlier. And the high period of activity, given the permit window that we're able to work in, is the month of October. A couple of that was some land acquisitions that we saw on the general fund side of the house, the Blue Point mine area. That purchase was in October. All told, that created a pretty hefty spike in the month of October. Moving on to December at 8.8 million, again higher than previous Decembers. Two projects really are the headlines there. The New Bullers Bar Foundation drain remediation project was a significant amount of activity in the month of December, as well as the Hallwood Habitat project. There was a spike in activity there. We'll leave it there. Next, we'll continue to look at expenses, but what this chart is doing is looking at total agency expenses, which is the total bar, in the portion of the agency expenses that are related to the Community Impact Grant Program, just to show you on a proportionate basis what is contributing to agency expenses. This has been an informational chart. If we see that the blue section starts taking up more of the overall bar, obviously that would be something we want to explain. So in the months where we do see that the portion of the grant expenses were higher compared to total agency expenses, I'll call those out and I'll talk about those now. In December was kind of our first spike. In December, we were able to disperse quite a bit of local share from the DWR Prop 1 implementation grant local shares. So we, at the grant agreement signed, the projects were kind of ongoing. So once that agreement was signed, we were able to start dispersing local shares, and that created a kind of an uptick in activity in the month of December. February obviously jumps out. It's not quite 50-50, maybe 60-40 split, agency expenses and grant-related expenses. The Trillia bond payment is a pretty significant portion. That's in flood risk reduction. And then the Wheatland water project, there was a flurry of activity in the month of February there. In the current month that we're looking at, April, the Linden County Water District wastewater upgrade and energy efficiency program, they are seeking their disbursement. It sounds like they're about 90% complete. They waited to submit their invoice until April, so we kind of saw a slug of expenses there in April, which kind of speaks to the budgeting methodology that I touched on earlier. Project schedules were one layer removed from. We're not 100% sure when those underlying projects are going to be completed and when the disbursements are going to be sought. And that was kind of a prime example. There was no activity to even suggest a trend, and then we got an invoice for 90% of the activity. No problem with that. We just budgeted to be prepared for that. Moving on. So here's a slide. What it's doing here is it's plotting 2 data points per month, revenue in blue, and expenses are in red. And again, for this whole fiscal year, I'll kind of hit on some outliers. First one being in July. Now, we typically have revenue that far exceeds expenses in July, just on the back of power generation. But in this year, as the general fund revenue slide showed, we also had the first half of the substantial DWR water transfer. So we had revenue at $37.7 million against expenses of $4.3 million. Also in July, expenses are typically less. It's kind of the hands off the units, let them run and capture the high priced hours in the market. Moving on to October, it'll sound familiar, but we had a pretty significant net loss in October. Expenses were high in October. Again, that Our House sediment removal project is roughly a $7 million project, and some land acquisitions. That was driving up expenses. So the outlier there is just some one-off projects that drove up expenses, and a relatively quiet revenue month, which is why we take some of our annual outages. Narrows 2 was also out in the month of October. Last outlier I'll call out is in January. We posted a significant net income. That is unusual. We can sometimes post a net loss in January if the Colgate Unit 2 outage actually slips into January, and there are times where that happens. And it's typically a low power sales month, but again, that DWR water transfer kind of changed the whole dynamic of January in the current fiscal year. Next slide here, a similar chart is the last 2, but I've kind of combined them. So we have revenue plotted here in blue. We have total agency expenses here in lime green. And then we have agency expenses backing out the grants here in red. Again, it's another kind of informational chart where if we see red line and green line start to really separate themselves from each other, that would be another signal to reevaluate our $10 million investment target in the Community Impact Grant Program. We're not seeing that here, but I will call out a couple of months that are kind of noteworthy. We'll look at February, which was our biggest, on the last slide, portion of total agency expenses that were related to grants. We were looking at that 60-40 split. We posted a pretty sizable net loss in February. You back out the grants and it's a much more manageable net loss. This gives us comfort that we have landed on a sustainable investment target in the community impact grant program, because if you take those grant expenses out, the agency expenses are now much more in line with revenue. In August, it's on a smaller scale here, and it's really clustered, but that was the 1 month that we've seen that we posted a net loss with grant activity. We would have posted a net gain without grant activity, but it's not substantial. It was just a chart that we put together. We want to keep an eye on how these things are trending, and that was the first month where we actually saw that dynamic play out. Last chart for current financials before we move on to forward-looking budget slides. This is a chart that is the rolling total of our net effect on reserves. So we had the budgeted amount of roughly 39 million. Right out of the gate in July, we were up to 33.4 million because of the substantial power generation and water transfer revenue. We had kind of a downward trend from September through December. Our house sediment removal project, we talked about that, the annual outages, both Narrows 2 and the 2 Colgate units. Then we kind of reversed course with the second half of the DWR water transfer, and we've been flat, relatively flat, all the way through April 30th, 2022. And as I mentioned on the agency-wide summary sheet, I anticipate through June 30th, we'll be right around that 39 to 40 million in net contribution to reserves as well. So I'll pause for any questions on current year financials before moving on to some of the FY 2023 budget slides. All right, so we'll move on. It looks like this is big enough. So this slide here is meant to be familiar to the agency-wide summary sheet that's included in the monthly financial packets, but structured just slightly different. So again, I'll give the lay of the land. We still have, moving from top to bottom, revenue at the top, expenses are in the middle, agency combined expenses here. We have net effect on reserves, effectively net income or net loss. Our reserves rolling total. And then to get to available cash, we're going to back out loans receivable because that's cash that we don't have. It's currently residing with somebody else and they're paying us back. And we're going to back out the no-touch reserve designation, which was a change that we made in the last reserve policy update, was to identify 3 of those 4 reserve policy designations as no touch. Those are really the rainy day funds. Moving left to right, there's a couple years of actuals here in fiscal year 2020, 2021, and current budget year 2022. We're going to focus on these 2, given it's a 2-year budget. So next fiscal year here ending 2023, and then a couple years of projections. This is using trend and our multi-year capital improvement plans to make a budget estimate for years 3 and 4 into the future. So what I want to give is a snapshot of here's what we're looking for approval, here's where we've come from, and here's where we think we're going. And this slide is attempting to do that. A couple of other differences before I dive into the numbers. On this sheet versus the agency-wide summary sheet, you'll look into expenses. I have them grouped into 2 categories in both funds, power systems and general fund. I have routine operating expenses, which is really our ongoing maintenance, compliance, operations, the stuff that really keeps us up and running. The second section is the non-routine and larger capital projects. What we mean by non-routine are they're larger than the ongoing maintenance. They're individually scoped and scheduled, but they're not quite capital. There is capital in there, but that's defining what non-routine is. Examples of this would be the Our House sediment removal project, because we're moving dirt. We don't really have an asset to depreciate after that. So it's large. It doesn't happen every year. It's individually scoped and scheduled. So we've called that non-routine, and we've moved it into that section of the expenses. On the general fund side, things like relicensing, although that's actually capital technically. In the community impact grant program disbursements, that $10 million is in that non-routine large down here in the general fund section. One of the reasons we do this is this structure, I think, helps the reader evaluate our performance, whether it's a stakeholder or an outside credit rating agency, which is something that we'll be looking into obtaining kind of a shadow rating. What would our rating look like given our current state? In case there was a need for borrowing in the future, we can help set up the pieces to be best prepared to obtain the best credit rating, which is then the cheapest rate for actually borrowing money. It gives them something to take a look at and evaluate our health, particularly breaking out routine operating expenses. And this sheet successfully demonstrates that these expenses are stable. We're not seeing those grow at an exponential rate. So when it comes to, again, the maintenance, compliance, and operations, and the keeping the doors open, and keeping us up and running, we're not seeing cost increases that are substantial over the years. On the non-routine, large, and capital project section, what they're seeing is phased projects that are planned. We have the multi-year capital improvement project plans that have recently been renamed. They were 5-year plans. We're really aiming for a 10-year horizon. So now we call it multi-year. So we don't have to pick a number. We'll just work towards 10. So that is what this sheet is. Now I'll touch on some numbers. So power systems revenue, we're at 81.9 million is the budget for power systems. That's up from prior year. And I'll dive into a little more detail. I'm gonna go quickly through this and switch slides here. General fund revenue at 25.2 million. That's down from 71.3, but we don't have that substantial water transfer. So agency-wide revenue at 107 million. We have power system expenses down from 48.7 down to 36.9 million. Again, more details is upcoming. General fund expenses also down from 63.9 million to 57.9 million. So agency combined expenses at 94.9 million. So we'll take the 107 million in revenue, back out expenses of 94.9. We'll leave a net effective reserves at 12.1 million. I want to key in on that number, particularly for the folks that are on the ABP meeting that saw that that number was actually negative 2 million when you reviewed it. So there's been some changes from that budget. One of them being surface water transfer availability. The ABP's financials, that was 0. On June 9th, we learned that we did have a small opportunity to conduct a transfer, and that's roughly 5.5 million. There's also still some expenses that I think will change even in July, and you'll see a subsequent budget adjustment. Again, with those community impact grant disbursements, I'm unsure what's going to come in June. As I mentioned, I wasn't able to wrap up May financials, so we may see a small increase in current year expenses that will allow us to take some money off the table in next year's budget. We're able to do that a little bit to reduce some expenses in next year's budget. And that is what caused the original proposed budget that the ABP saw was a net loss of roughly 2 million. Now we're right side up. It's a contribution to reserves of 12.1 million. So I wanted to call that out specifically because that's definitely different than the financials that the ABP committee recommended. For reserves rolling total, that would put us at 232.9 million. That is above the $200 million investment target. But there also is a upcoming, I believe, requirement to bring the reserve policy before the board. It's due for a refresh, at least an annual report, but we think it's a refresh. We think the targets on the buckets could use another look to make sure that those numbers are still accurate. The methodology that we use is now a couple of years old, so let's take another look at it and ensure that 200 million is still the right number. And we can kind of go from there, given that we have reserves at 232. Loans receivable, one note I will make that this does not include the 2 agenda items that were just approved. I didn't want to jump ahead of us. So the 14 point, I think roughly 5 million in the county UAL loan, it's in there at I think roughly 10. I have a placeholder in there, it's roughly 10. And the 3 million for Chilia, that's not included at all. So that number will need to increase. What we're really doing there is changing what's cash on hand reserves. So it'll change that bottom available cash number. Now I'm actually going to jump ahead here. I'm going to change the order of operations here. You don't really want to watch me do this, but let's see. All right, sorry, I kind of went off script there. So we were looking at expenses on the long range forecast. We saw routine operating expenses. We saw non-routine and capital expenses. In the packets, I brought this back. It's something that we did a couple of years ago. Don Blazer, actually a great recommendation of the ABP committee. to bring this back. Because I've always talked about it's not the routine expenses that are really moving the needle on our budgets year to year. It's these individually scoped and scheduled projects that are moving the needle in our budgets year to year. Here's a collection of those projects with a threshold. They're sorted. It's not every single one, but the big ones are there. Lay of the land on this sheet. This is power systems, large projects and capital for next fiscal year. Project name, location and system. This lends itself to the cost account structure that the team uses internally to manage their costs. So this is kind of a one-to-one here. They'll see this and recognize it as well. We have estimated remaining costs. What I'm doing here is the current budget, the proposed budget here ending in June 30th, 2023 has one number, but I wanted to give some sense of what the estimated remaining cost of this project is. So if we're going to get started on a project and there's $100,000 in today's budget, but I know that it's a $10 million project, I want to communicate that. So that's the intent of estimated remaining costs. I'm not going to go down to each and every one of these, but I did want to give a sense of what that supplementary document was in your packet. I'll touch on a couple. Tunnel pin stock, there's $6 million in the proposed budget for next fiscal year with an estimated $26.5 million remaining. This does assume that the tunnel outage takes place in 2023. I'm sorry, yeah, 2023. But a little foreshadowing, we're still evaluating that given supply chain issues. Can we get all of the required parts on site before we dewater the tunnel? We absolutely have to make sure that we can do that before we pull the trigger on a tunnel outage in 2023. So more to come. But a $6 million number in 2023's budget, that's pretty substantial. If tunnel outages postpone, expenses are going to come down. That net effect on reserves at $12 million will go up even further. So just putting all the pieces together there. One more that I want to call out in power systems. This is warehouse and admin building or power system headquarters. $1.2 million in the proposed budget for 2023 with an estimated $25.2 million upcoming. The 1.2 is really to finish design. We're nearing completion of design, at which point there will be another standalone agenda item before the board to go over that design and seek approval on construction and moving that forward. So the 1.2 million is likely to be revised in conjunction with that agenda item, because there is not a budget in there to actually break ground and start site work and actually building the warehouse until we bring it back before the board. So I did want to call that one out as well. General funds is also included in there. In the interest of time, I'm not going to bring that one up unless there are questions on either large project worksheet. Moving slowly, hearing none. Jim, are you able to see? Am I sharing the right one? Thank you. All right, so now we'll move on to budget trends just to explain some of the differences. Bringing back this concept again, this is looking at a couple of prior year actuals, projected year-end actuals. This is the numbers I was quoting to arrive at the percentages of budget on the agency-wide summary sheet. I was quoting these, and then the proposed budget for next fiscal year. What I'm doing both on this revenue slide and then the upcoming expense slides is to really collapse down the income statements. So it's a one-to-one if you wanted to look at the income statement and these charts. That's where you'll find the numbers. We'll start at power systems. Operating revenue is energy sales, where non-operating revenue in power systems is really not substantial. You'll see 145,000 in projected year in actuals. This interest income basically is interest income. You'll look at fiscal year 2021. We had 1.6 million, or almost 1.7 million. That's the outlier. That was FEMA storm damage reimbursement that we finally received in fiscal year 2021. That's the only time non-operating revenue in power systems really matters. So if it never mattered again, that would be great, personally. As fun as it is to work through that process. So we're really focused on the power system as operating revenue and energy sales. So we're at projected year in actuals of 70.9 million, 15% increase to 81.8 million. We are still forecasting kind of depressed generation numbers, but prices are increasing. So we're following that trend. The RA prices in particular are very strong, and we expect that to be the case over at least the next couple of years. In fact, in the current year, RA accounted for 33% of our total revenue. That is pretty substantial. One item to note on the budget of $81.8 million in FY 2023 for power systems revenue is we are slightly more aggressive than we have been in prior years. As we've, again, kind of developed our sophistication, we're trending these prices, we're seeing these prices go higher. We were using a conservative pricing and a 50% hydrology method to arrive at our power systems budget. We've changed that. The hydrology is unchanged, but we're using a much more aggressive pricing data set to arrive at power systems for next year's budget, just because we feel so strongly that we know where the trends are going. So that budget is a little less conservative. It's not as low as we've been in years past. Moving on to general fund, we have projected year-end actuals of $51.9 million. Operating revenue in general fund, that's water sales. So we see the 78% reduction down to 11.4 million. That 51 million, as you guys know, that's the outlier. That's just an abnormal opportunity to transfer a significant amount of water in 2022 at dry prices. Non-operating revenue, a little more substantial in general fund. What makes up non-operating revenue in general fund is incoming grant revenue and interest income. The bulk, like I'd say 95% of our reserves sit in the general fund. So that's where the majority of the interest income lives. So when we see a 2.5 is projected year in actuals at 452% increase to 13.8 million, what you're really seeing there is, again, that aggressive budgeting of incoming grant. It's front loaded. So the budget is far higher than the 2.5 that we actually saw in current year. I'm really just rolling it forward so it's still front loaded. So that number obviously jumps out at you. That's the budget methodology showing itself again. Question on that one before I move on? I'll move on to expenses. Starting with power systems, same chart. Again, I've collapsed the income statement sections here to maintenance, operations, admin in general, and then our called out item capital projects. Projected year in actuals versus proposed budget, and I'll call out some outliers. Maintenance, projected year in actuals is 17.7 million. We're down 22% to 13.7 million. What's driving that is, I feel like I've mentioned it 100 times, our house sediment removal project, not a capital project. So it's technically maintenance because you're getting dirt out from behind the dam. So that reduction alone is causing the decrease in maintenance. The other outlier I'll call out is in capital projects, 11.5 million, up 36% to 15.7 million. Those projects are the ones that are really called out in the large project worksheet, particularly the two that I identified, tunnel outage and power system headquarters. All told, projected year in actuals of 36 million, up 3%. I don't know why that's red. Up 3% to 36.9 million. We're spending roughly the same in power systems, just on different things. It's a little less in maintenance because of just what kind of projects they are. A little more in capital improvements, which we like to see. Those are investments into our balance sheet. So we're happy to see that. Any questions on power systems trends before moving on to general fund? All right, general fund it is. Same structure, collapse the income statement. What's nice about this is we're having the series of special meetings that are going over the strategic priorities. As I mentioned in that first one that kind of kicked it off, is I wanted the income statement to have a very strong link between itself and the strategic plan. So you'll see that in the income statement sections. Water resources and flood risk reduction. We just had Ryan do a fantastic job at the special board meeting a couple of weeks ago. Later today, you'll see the power systems one. So it's such a strong strategic priority. It gets a whole income statement. But moving forward, you'll see things like resource planning, which will touch on fishery and relicensing. I'll call up a couple of outliers here again in the trends, looking at projected actuals through proposed budget. We saw a 75% decrease. That's the first big one that jumps out at 5.4 million down to 1.4 million. In capital projects, this is the absence of a land acquisition. So we're not going to acquire land each and every year. So that's what that drop off is. 95% increase in water resources. So we had a projected year-end actual of 3 million. We're up to 5.9 million. We're coming in under budget in the current year on water resources. There was a anticipated phase 2 of the Ostrom Road repair project. It didn't take place in the current year, not off the table. So that budget is being rolled forward. So that's the big driver there. It's really shifting. We didn't spend it this year, but I can't take it off the table yet. Moving on to the next one, 54% increase in flood risk reduction from 10.5 million to 16.3 million. These are community impact grant projects that are unspent. That I just need to roll the dollars forward. So the dollars are appropriated next year, plus the new commitments in the last round, the application window out of the community impact grant program. So budgets there is, and I'll look at two numbers here, 8.4 million in grants under flood risk reduction, 7.1 million in grants under community water projects. That's larger than the $10 million investment target, but that's because we have some prior approvals being rolled forward because they're not spent yet. The underlying work's not complete yet. These are reimbursement grants. So that's how we arrived about the 15.5 million in grants. Next one, fishery enhancement, 178% increase from 3.7 million to 10.4 million. This is a significant increase in efforts on the fish screen replacement project. Roughly $7 million is in next year's budget to push forward on that project. All told, we're at roughly 30% increase from 44.9 million in estimated year and actuals to 57.9 million in the proposed budget for FY 2023. I've spouted off enough numbers at you, so I'll take a brief pause here before I switch to the personnel portion of the budget for FY 2023.
Any questions from the board to this point?
One quick question. How challenging has it been to taking inflation and recession into consideration doing all this? It's hard to say whether it's a plus or a minus for us.
Yeah, it's been a huge challenge. A lot of it has been kind of insulated because it's been such a factor that some of the projects haven't kicked off as soon as we thought they would. So it's freeing up budget. So we're not looking for budget increases. That's why we're not peppering you guys with budget increases as we tackle these projects, as we simply have to postpone them because we can't get it even at an inflated rate. So that's been difficult. And then it might, cause a tunnel outage delay, not being able to get the key component, the flange for the penstock valve. So grappling with all that is really taking a toll on project phasing. But it's nice that we have these multi-year project plans in place, that we can find projects that we can source and pull those forward and push projects out that can't be sourced and we're really constrained by supply chain. So at least we have some tools to try to combat it.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Through the chair, just a quick comment. Excuse me. Curtis, I suspect that your significant other has learned never to ask the question around the dinner table. Tell me how your day went today, Curtis, and really great information and a lot of detail. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a subtle, hey, can you wrap this up? Yeah, I can. Yes, I can. I got to open one more document, though. I apologize. That's good, right, Jim? Perfect. All right, so I'm going to quickly go through these position justifications are included in the packet. I won't read those to you at Randy's request, but we'll go through the highlighted ones here. Quickly though, I've altered this personnel allocation chart to something I think meets our needs a little bit better. Prior versions of this chart had full-time employees in column 1, general fund and power systems in columns 2 and 3. It didn't serve us any purpose. I don't think it served you any purpose, so we've changed it to total authorized, filled, and vacant. I think that's given us much better information. A shout out to Teresa Del Santo, our HR manager, who made that suggestion when she first got here, so I appreciate that. First, the change here, we have compliance engineer. We're looking to unfund that. So that position vacated during the course of the current fiscal year. We took that step back, so how do we get these tasks accomplished in the most efficient and effective manner? and we landed on, skipping ahead, hydro compliance analyst. This is a position with kind of a reduced scope, subsequently reduced pay rate. We have onboarded a health and safety officer, which took some of those tasks off the compliance engineer. We think now all these tasks are residing in the most proper job descriptions. So that's the first change. Second change, environmental specialist is currently allocated and is currently vacant. Through the recruitment process, we're not quite getting what we're looking for to, so therefore to expand the flexibility in the recruitment process, we've introduced this senior environmental specialist job description. We're calling this flexibly staffed. We're not looking for two, just one. It might be a senior, it might be a not senior, but this is really to increase the flexibility and attracting the right candidate for that position. Before I go to the next two changes, one benefit of this chart looking at, sorry, don't get seasick, authorized, filled, and vacant, we're going to go down to the operations manager. We have two filled. We have one authorized, two filled, zero vacant. This is an overfill related to the succession planning policy that we brought to you a couple of years ago. So we have a current operations manager that's nearing retirement. So we have backfilled into an operations manager who will take the lead when he retires. And we have the operations manager filling the role of, again, don't get seasick, or the power contracts. Mary Gable's old energy and contract administrator. So that position is vacant and we have two operations manager in the name of succession planning. So I wanted to call that out. This chart does a much better job of communicating that. Now to the two highlighted ones, I'll talk about them together. We're looking for one more senior hydrologist. Well, two-step here, from a supervising hydrologist to senior hydrologist, and then looking to add a second senior hydrologist. Overall increase in headcount of one person in that division. Somewhat related, water resources manager, new position, so it's proposed, currently vacant, obviously. This is really the next iteration of standing up that division that directly relates to the strategic priority in the strategic plan. We have the water resources and flood risk reduction division. Ryan, as director, is now really looking to structure that department again, so that the objectives are accomplished in the most efficient and effective way possible. This was the next iteration of that process. All told, total authorized at 97.5 people. We won't tell that half person who he is. 88.5 filled, the half is a part-time. And then 10 vacancies currently being recruited. And that wraps up personnel, unless there's any questions. And if there's no questions, that wraps up FY 2023 budget.
Any questions? Any public comment? Okay, do we need multiple motions on this? No, just one will work. Okay.
Through the chair. Before I get to that point, you know, Curtis, I go back a few years along with Andy, not quite as far as Andy. And the budget once upon a time was where you've gone with the budget and the presentation is huge. To be able to explain and show, touch on all the areas that you do, you've done an amazing job. This will be my last opportunity to actually deal with the budget and probably approve the budget. But I just wanted to let you know that it really is appreciated, the depth that you've gone into. I can't imagine you sleep at night without seeing numbers, dollar signs, all kinds of charts and graphs. But you are committed. You are a great example of commitment to making it easier to understand for the board and the public. You deal with a lot. So having said that, I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you. I have a first and a second. Is there a second? Okay, I have a first and a second. I think I already did public comment, but just to make sure, any public comment on this item? Okay. Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, next we're gonna move on to manager's report.
Okay, I have to say Curtis asked for a raise yesterday. I told him no, but I'm sure he's gonna be in my office in like an hour saying, hey, didn't you hear what Randy said? Just kidding. Okay, manager's report. Bullard's Bar is at 1,934.62 feet. What does that mean? It means it's pretty dang full. It's only 20 feet from the top. And in Northern California, and California in general, that's pretty good. I was out there a couple of weeks ago letting the dogs swim. I think I told you this at the last board meeting, and it looks full and it looks great. And that's we have a unique watershed. We operate really well, and I think it's gonna be a great recreation year. But when I report that number, I want people to understand what it really means. It means in 20 feet from full, you might think, well, 20 feet, that's a long ways. But in a reservoir that big, it looks full. As a matter of fact, I saw I may have already told you this story, but 2 Sundays ago, I was watching the news, and a grandfather and a grandson had a string of kokanee out on the dock of a marina. I said, man, that looks like New Bullard's Bar. And a couple seconds later, it was, oh, and here's a grandfather and grandson, a New Bullard's Bar reservoir. I'm like, man, it is full. It looks good. So at any rate, Bullard's is doing great. It's actually 105% of normal year to date. When we've had 694,000 acre feet of flow, and that's 63% of average year to date. However, crazy things do happen up there. I think it was early last week, we had a woman lock herself behind the Cottage Creek warehouse gate and had to be removed by the sheriff's department. That happened, sheriff responded, and actually the woman, I believe, bit the sheriff, and the sheriff went to the hospital. But at any rate, everything's okay now. And we also had a marina employee had their vehicle stolen from the near the boat ramp at Cottage Creek. So those incidents, plus a couple incidents related to other types of vehicle vandalism and thefts, and a few years ago, similar gas thefts. We have a meeting scheduled getting scheduled next week with the sheriff and the Forest Service to discuss what we may be able to do for security at New Bullard's Bar over the remainder of the recreation season. So whatever's driving this, I don't know, but things are happening up there that we don't necessarily want to see happen. So we're gonna try and tackle that. Narrows 1 is currently under annual maintenance outage. It'll be returned to service next week. From what I understand, things are going well. Tim Trung, our chief dam safety engineer, has had a project called the New Bullard's Bar Dam Robotic Total Station Project. That project will begin this summer and be completed this summer. And what it does is it's basically a robotic measuring device that constantly measures the deflection of the dam. So we have the plumb bobs inside the dam, and if any of you have been on field tours of the dam, you can go inside, and we usually open up the little doors that show you the plumb bobs, and that's how the operators will measure deflection throughout the year based on temperature and based on how full the reservoir is. But what this will do is this will provide real-time data of the deflection of the dam. We'll be able to compare that to the actual manual data. Tim's been working on this for years. This is one project where we're trying to digitize the data we get from the dam. So we will always have the manually measured data. So we'll have a historic record of data, but we'll have real-time data constantly coming in based, whether it's leakage flow inside the dam, whether it's the deflection, whether it's the uplift pressure. We're working towards a more digitized world, and this is one of those examples. Tim also was a guest panelist at NHA's webinar and led a 3D modeling demonstration focusing on visualization and communications at the dam. The 3D modeling techniques serve to inform future inspections and risk assessments. And I want to thank Tim for his representation of the agency on a national stage. So he's doing wonderful things at the dam, leading the industry and showing it off at the same time. Okay, I don't know that I need to mention the drought. I think everyone understands that we're in a drought. Like I said, though, our reservoir is in good shape. Okay, the weather forecast. So as far as floods go, we have like historic floods that we reference, and folks like Charlie Matthews will talk about the 1955 flood because he was a young man and he remembers it, and then the 62 and 63 that we don't really emphasize in our discussions, and then I was alive for 86 and 97, and I talk about those. Corollary to floods is heat wave events, and there's a few out there that we talk about. We talk about one that I remember because I worked here and it was only a couple of years ago. It's the 2020 heat event where we had rolling blackouts, and the Cal ISO actually called us directly and said, can you do more with your electrical generation? We also have the 2006 event, which is the peak event for the Cal ISO. The most generation was ever made in the Cal ISO in the summer of 2006. I think it was in July, and it was 51,000 megawatts were generated at that time. That's the peak generation in the Cal ISO. So the reason I bring this up is we're going into a heat wave starting today, basically, for the next 8 to 12 days, which could, and I'm not saying it's going to, but could kind of max out that type of demand, like the 2020 demand or the 2006 demand. So just letting you know, our generators are going to be asked to perform, and it's going to be hot over the next 8 to 10 days. So just kind of relating that to, like, there are flood events that stick in our mind, and there are heat events that stick in our mind, and one may be coming in the next 8 to 12 days. Okay, I'm going to breeze through human resources update, but I'm going to read you the community and communications portion, because Dee and Jackie will get upset if I don't read every sentence in there, because they put a lot of time in that. At any rate, we did have Daryl Richter, our new electrical technician, start on June 8th. And we had most of our interns start on June 13th. And I think one of them started yesterday. I don't remember his name, and I met him and I feel bad about it. However, I think there's still a couple in the audience. So any interns out there, would you please stand up and say hello to the board? And Chris, yep, here we go. Okay, there's three of the 6 or 7 we have. So great. They're here and working. Okay, communications and community relations. In communications later this week, a reporter from the National Journal in Washington, D.C. is coming out to do a story about the forest restoration efforts underway in the Yuba watershed, and he'll be speaking to both Joanna and myself. We had a fantastic coverage of our event kicking off the Wheatland water meter replacement project. Comstocks Magazine, Fox 40 TV News, and the Appeal Democrat were all there in person. We had follow-on coverage as well from our press release on KFBK Radio, and there was coverage previewing the event the morning of on ABC 10 and KCRA 3. Appeal Democrat had a story about the North Yuba Water District canceling a meeting with us and South Feather Water and Power, which included many email exchanges about the meeting that were the result of a public records request. The appeal also covered our $17.4 million in grant awards at the last board meeting. The Sacramento Bee did a story about water transfers that mentioned our long history of transfers. The story was really explaining to people why transfers can happen, even though they're being asked to cut back on their use by their retail providers. Additionally, Jackie was on 93Q radio last week talking about water safety. In community relations, there was a Tricky Yuba screening for the 3 Rotary clubs at the Sutter Theater last week. We had a booth promoting river safety and life jackets at the OPUD Water Safety Day at the Olive Hurst Pool. This week, the fair kicks off, and we are sponsors of both the fair and the Ag Awards given out at the fair. We're also working with Director Fletcher on a display about water supply at the fairgrounds, and we'll be showing some of our videos there. Lastly, we are also sponsoring the 4th of July fireworks at the River Bottoms. Our next regular board meeting is on July 5th, and we'll have a special meeting for continuing discussion of the strategic plan update. And then we have an ABP committee and communications committee on July 19th. I would like to also thank Curtis for doing a wonderful job with our budgeting over the last several years that I've worked here. It has gone from what I used to work on with Paige when I was at PG&E, from just a big detailed spreadsheet that was an absolute, it was fun, let's just say, trying to work through that, to what you saw today. And yeah, Curtis does a very thorough job, and I'm glad we have him.
Thank you. Any questions from board members?
Yes, could you relate a little more on the introduction of salmon at Fuller's Bar?
Yeah. So you must be referring to the grant we are receiving from CDFW. So this is a grant to study the potential for reintroduction of salmon upstream of New Buller's Bar in the North Yuba River. We won't actually be introducing the fish. We're going to test. We're going to do a few different things. We're going to test rotary screw traps and their effectiveness at capturing the juveniles. And we'll also do additional temperature monitoring, both in the main stem North Yuba River and the tributaries, because the tributaries have a significant amount of potential habitat as well. And then the purpose of the rotary screw trap testing is to determine a method that's, let's say, economically feasible to capture the juveniles. If the rotary screw traps are not effective, we need to have an alternative method. And so we're going to prepare a report or do a study on what alternative method might be able to be implemented to capture the juveniles if the rotary screw traps don't work. Those are the primary scopes of work for the $2 million. Like I said, it's not actual introduction of any salmon species as part of this grant.
I'm trying to think of the wording that we don't get trapped by putting salmon there. They're called something.
Yeah, experimental designation, correct, yeah.
Will that be part of this first study?
It doesn't need to be because there are no species being placed up there. There is an experimental designation being prepared by NIMS right now. It has been put out for public comment. We've provided public comment. The ball is in their court on whether they issue that or not. But it's not needed for this grant because we aren't actually moving fish to the river.
I mean, that was always kind of a hang up that they could hold us back. Now might be the time to push it forward since they're spending their money.
Very true.
Great. And could you give us another report on the problems we have in the North Yuba trying to get water to the different parcels?
We've engaged in conversations with both North Yuba Water District leadership and South Feather Water and Power leadership. We're here to engage in future discussions. We're here to help. I'm hopeful that North Yuba will reach out to us and let us know how we can help. But at this point, the offer has been extended to help, and we're just waiting for a response.
Thank you.
Okay. Director Vasquez, anything? Okay. Director Blazer? Director Blazer?
Well, per some recent conversation with Dee Dee, I'm really excited that we're moving ahead a little more on the youth water education programs, the rafting in particular, and then the, Dee Dee, I already forgot what you told me. It's fish in the classroom. Is that right? Anyway, it's encouraging to see this for these young students.
Great. Did you take a raft ride yet? Yeah. This year you should take one then. Director Fuhr?
So I would make the motion that any year that we don't increase the fee by 2.5%, we have them shunt that amount over into their charitable river endowment.
So not agendized, we can't make that motion. Are you requesting?
Request that we put that on the agenda.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay.
You have a second to be put on the
agenda. Double check your rule set, but I believe that your rules allow any direct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So we will put that on the agenda consideration. Probably Jim Leslie can knock this on.
Okay. Thank you.
Real quick for process, does that request have to be at a board meeting? Like if a director makes, okay, thank you.
Okay. Director Fletcher?
Willie, somewhere in the next couple of months, would you follow up? Let's have a kind of a report on the CCN discussion we had, gosh, goes back maybe a year ago with Placer County and Pioneer, and just kind of a refresher as to where we're at.
And you refer to CCA, Community Choice Aggregation. Yep, no problem. And just to remind the board, we do have a consultant working on a report, and we should have that report any day. I've seen a draft of that report, send it back to them for additional work. We should have it in the next month or so. So the timing is right for your request. So that's the plan.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Director Matthews?
In talking with the mayor, he's going to try to get the committee activated again on Ellis Lake so we can report what we've done and what we're going to do in the future. We've not had a meeting since January, I believe.
So I think we disbanded did we disband the Ellis Lake Ad Hoc Committee? Is that correct? Okay, right. So, I mean, I guess there's two options. We could form a formal ad hoc committee if that meeting will be happening, or certainly some directors are welcome to meet informally with the city in addition to that. So
I think they're looking for an informal committee because they put the two committees together. They ran into different Brown Act problems.
Okay, so I would encourage the interested and appropriate directors to meet with the city as long as it doesn't exceed a majority of the board.
Yes.
Perfect. And if for some reason that becomes a problem, then we can establish a formal ad hoc committee. Okay. And so anything else? No. Okay. So just a couple comments for me. First of all, welcome to the interns. Excited to have you guys join us this summer and appreciate all the hard work you're going to put in. And also, I had a great hike on Father's Day with my family up at New Bullard's Bar. We took a hike on the Bullard's Bar Trail. It's at least the beginning of it from the Vista Point. We walked in about 2 miles and back out about 2 miles. I guess it's a 14-mile loop, which I am in no condition to go quite that far. But anyway, it was great. It's very shaded, great views of the lake. My only complaint, and I know there's nothing we can do about this, the first half mile of the trail is a 200-foot elevation drop, which is nice until you return, and it's a half mile of a 250-foot elevation incline for the last part of your hike. So I might start at the other end next time is, I guess, my advice to anyone who's looking to hike out there. So maybe a dark day or somewhere else, unless you enjoy finishing your hike with that kind of elevation climb. So anyway, we have 2 closed session items. One, I believe, is number 13 is being postponed till a future meeting. So we'll only be talking about item 12 today. We will report out after that closed session and adjourn the meeting at that time. And we do have a special meeting this afternoon at the agency at 2 p.m. So anyway, so with that, we'll take a 5 to 10 minute break and move into closed session.
Yuba-Sutter.live's local government live streams are presented by Plumas Lake Self-Storage in Plumas Lake. Residents are helping other residents keep things safe, providing indoor storage units, outdoor RV and vehicle parking, moving supplies, and Penske truck rentals. Details at plumaslakeselfstorage.com. There's an American flair at our county fair, the Yuba-Sutter Fair, Thursday, June 23rd through Sunday, June 26th. See locally raised livestock and the care given them by their young owners. Then buy some of the best sheep, pigs, goats, and beef beginning at 9 a.m. Saturday, June 25th. It's all at the Yuba-Sutter Fair with an American flair at our county fair, noon Thursday, June 23rd through 10 p.m. Sunday, June 26th. Get details at ysfair.com.